Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. The photograph appears unremarkable at first glance, a group portrait taken at St. Mary's General Hospital in 1914, just as the Great War was beginning its terrible march across Europe. The sepia tones have darkened with age, but the formal composition remains clear enough. 13 staff members arranged in 2 rows. Administrators and doctors standing proudly in the back row, nurses seated primly in the front, all wearing the crisp white uniforms and caps that signified their profession. The hospital administrator, a stern-faced man with a handlebar mustache, occupies the center position. His nameplate identifies him as Dr. Edmund Thornfield. He stands ramrod straight, perhaps a holdover from his military service, flanked by 6 other physicians of varying ages. Their expressions convey the gravity one would expect from medical professionals during that era. Serious, committed, aware of their importance. The front row features 6 nurses in identical uniforms, their starched white caps perfectly positioned, hands folded identically on their laps. Their expressions are similarly uniform, the same polite professional half-smile that was standard for such institutional photography of the period. The photograph itself was discovered during renovations of the now-abandoned St. Mary's Hospital building last year. It had been sealed within a wall cavity, carefully wrapped in waxed paper and preserved remarkably well. The contractor who found it thought little of it until his daughter, a history student, noticed something peculiar. Look at the front row again. Count the nurses. 6 seated figures, each in identical white. Now examine their faces more carefully. The 5th nurse from the left, something about her appears different. Her smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. Her posture, while superficially correct, seems oddly rigid, and her uniform, while initially appearing identical to the others, shows subtle discrepancies in the collar and cuff design when scrutinized closely. But here's what makes this image truly disturbing. Hospital records from 1914 clearly state that St. Mary's employed exactly 12 staff members at this time, 6 doctors and 5 nurses, plus the administrator. There should only be 5 nurses in this photograph, yet there she sits, the 6th nurse, staring out from the past with that not-quite-right smile. Further research into hospital employment records confirmed that no 6th nurse was ever officially hired or paid during this period. Patient logs make no mention of her. None of the surviving correspondence from other staff members references her existence. Who was this woman? How did she appear in an official staff photograph without being part of the official staff? And why does her presence seem to coincide with the unusually high mortality rate that plagued the hospital's East Wing during the 3 months following this photograph's creation? The mystery deepens when examining the back of the photograph. Written in faded ink is a curious notation. Remember, she isn't there. The handwriting matches that of Dr. Thornfield himself, according to other preserved documents. But she is there, undeniably present. Counting her, there are 13 people in this photograph. Unless we're counting wrong, or unless someone else isn't really there. The photograph found its way to my desk last Wednesday, accompanied by a folder containing what little additional information had been unearthed. As curator of the County Historical Society's medical archives, I've examined hundreds of hospital photographs from this era. This one should have been unremarkable, yet I've barely slept since I first laid eyes on it. I contacted Alice Thornfield, the great-granddaughter of Administrator Thornfield, now 87 and living in a retirement community just outside town. When I showed her the photograph, her reaction was immediate and visceral. She blanched, her arthritic hand trembling as she pushed the image away. My grandmother spoke of this. She whispered. She called it the warning picture. She forbade it being displayed in their home. According to Alice, her grandmother, who had married Dr. Thornfield in 1915, claimed that the hospital had suffered a series of inexplicable events following the photograph. Patients reported seeing a nurse entering their rooms at night, though when they rang for assistance afterward, they were told no nurse had been assigned to them. Hospital staff began finding medical equipment rearranged in the mornings, medication carts disturbed, patient charts annotated with treatment suggestions in handwriting no one recognized. Most disturbing were the deaths. 13 patients over 13 weeks, all in the East Wing, all occurring between 2 and 3 in the morning. Each victim had received exemplary care with promising prognoses, yet succumbed to sudden, unexplained deterioration. I've since discovered that St. Mary's originally stood on land purchased from the estate of Eliza Westmore, whose family home had burned in 1907 with her inside. Local newspapers described Eliza as a spinster with nursing aspirations, who had been repeatedly rejected from training programs due to concerns about her temperament and suitability. The hospital's construction logs detail an unusual delay when workers refused to continue excavation after uncovering what they described as a small cache of personal effects, including a partially burned nurse's textbook and uniform fragments. Work only resumed when Administrator Thornfield personally removed these items and had them properly disposed of. I've begun cross-referencing death certificates from the affected period. Each patient's cause of death differs superficially: respiratory failure, cardiac arrest, unexplained hemorrhage. But one curious detail emerges. The attending physician noted unusual lividity around the throat in 11 of the 13 cases. Yesterday, I received a response from the photography expert I'd consulted. The analysis confirms the photograph has not been tampered with or altered. All 13 figures were present when the photograph was taken. More unsettling, however, was his observation about the peculiar nurse. Unlike everyone else in the image whose bodies show slight blurring from the necessary stillness during long exposure times, the sixth nurse is in perfect, unnatural focus, as though she alone did not need to breathe or shift during the photographer's process. I've begun dreaming of her. In my dreams, she's always counting, always reaching 13 before looking directly at me with that same not-quite-right smile. My third night with the photograph propped against my desk lamp, I finally noticed something I'd overlooked. In the window reflection behind the hospital staff, barely perceptible in the sepia tones, stands another figure, watching the group from outside the frame. This morning, I drove to the abandoned St. Mary's site. The building has stood empty for 20 years, its Victorian architecture gradually surrendering to nature's reclamation. The east wing remains partially intact, though most windows are now jagged mouthfuls of broken glass. County records show redevelopment plans repeatedly approved, then mysteriously abandoned. I had no legitimate reason to enter, but the padlock on the service entrance hung broken. Inside, dust motes swirled through shafts of light that penetrated the gloom. My footsteps echoed through empty corridors as I made my way toward the east wing. The air grew noticeably colder as I approached. The former nurses' station stood at the junction of two hallways, its wooden counter warped with age and water damage. Behind it, a wall of cubbyholes once held patient charts. Something compelled me to reach into the recesses of one. My fingers touched paper. I withdrew a yellowed nurse's cap, folded with precise care. Beneath it lay a handwritten letter dated October 30th, 1914. To whomever finds this, we have made a terrible mistake. She was here before us, before the hospital, before the groundbreaking. I've searched the county records and found her name among those who perished in the Westmore house fire. But she did not truly perish, for I have seen her moving through these halls, always counting, always reaching 13. Nurse Matthews disappeared yesterday. We found her cap and uniform folded neatly on her bed, but no trace of her. Dr. Thornfield insists we proceed as normal. He has destroyed the logbooks mentioning her and instructed staff to consolidate her duties. Today he gathered us for a photograph and insisted we leave no empty spaces in our arrangement. I counted us before the flash, 12. I count us in the developed photograph, 13. She has replaced Matthews, yet no one seems to notice but me. 3 patients died last night. I heard counting from their rooms. God forgive us, we built on her ground without proper remembrance. She seeks to complete her training, to finally become what she was denied in life. Each death serves as her lesson. Nurse Catherine Wilson. The letter crumbled slightly at its edges as my hands trembled. A sound behind me. Soft footfalls on the dusty linoleum. I turned to find nothing but empty corridor. Later that afternoon, I telephoned the county records office seeking information about Catherine Wilson. The clerk sounded confused. That's strange. Someone else called asking about her yesterday. A woman. Said she was a relative. Did she leave a name? Let me check. Yes, she identified herself as E. Westmore. My blood chilled. Was there a callback number? No, but she mentioned visiting your historical society today. Said she was interested in medical artifacts, particularly nursing items from 1914. I glanced at my desk where the photograph had stood for the past 3 nights. It was gone. In its place lay a starched white nurse's cap, perfectly folded. The telephone at the front desk is ringing now. The receptionist just transferred the call to my office. I can hear breathing on the line, and someone counting. I haven't answered the phone. 5 minutes have passed, and it continues to ring, ceaselessly, impossibly, without transferring to voicemail. The rhythmic sound has taken on a metronomic quality, like a heartbeat or counting. Still shaken from my discovery, I've locked myself in the archives basement, surrounded by the dusty remnants of St. Mary's past. In my haste to retreat, I grabbed a box of records from 1914, administrative logs, personnel files, and a slim volume bearing the simple label, Incidents. The personnel file for Catherine Wilson includes a photograph I hadn't seen before. Unlike the formal group portrait, this is a casual image, Catherine smiling genuinely on the hospital steps. But what arrests my attention is the window behind her. In its reflection stands a blurry female figure in a nurse's uniform, watching. The image is dated October 28, 1914, 2 days before Catherine wrote her desperate letter, 3 days before she vanished. The incidents log contains brief clinical entries of unusual occurrences at the hospital. Most are mundane, equipment failures, patient altercations, but beginning in August 1914, a pattern emerges. August 12th, pediatric patient, RT, reports counting nurse during night hours. No nurse assigned. Possible dream state. August 15th, night staff report medication reorganized without authorization. Counting audible from vacant rooms. August 29th, 3 staff members independently report glimpsing unidentified nurse in East Wing. Security sweep negative. The entries continue, growing increasingly frequent until October 30th, precisely 13 weeks after the photograph was taken. Then, abruptly, no further incidents are recorded. The remaining pages are blank except for one final entry dated November 12th, written in Administrator Thornfield's distinctive hand. Matter resolved. Nurse Wilson voluntarily resigned due to nervous exhaustion. No further documentation required. My phone buzzes with a text message from an unknown number. Count them again. With trembling hands, I retrieve a magnifying glass from my desk drawer and examine the group photograph once more. I've been so fixated on the 6th nurse that I failed to study each face methodically. The truth strikes me with horrifying clarity. In the back row, the 3rd doctor from the left, whose name badge reads Dr. Harrison Wells, shares the same unsettling quality as the 6th nurse. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. His posture is unnaturally stiff. Hospital employment records show no Dr. Wells ever worked at St. Mary's. There aren't 13 people in the photograph. There are 14. The basement door rattles violently, though I know I locked it. Dust sifts down from the ceiling as footsteps move across the floor above. Multiple sets, moving in perfect synchronization. I hear counting through the door. Not just one voice. 2 voices, counting in unison. They've reached 11. My phone buzzes again. We're completing the set. 13 lessons, 13 students, 13 teachers. The counting reaches 12. The doorknob turns. The jammed door somehow holds against the pressure from outside, but I know it won't last. My eyes dart frantically around the basement for any escape route. A window, a service tunnel, anything. Nothing but concrete walls and metal shelving. The counting stops at 12. Then silence. A woman's voice, gentle yet void of warmth, calls through the door. You've been researching us so thoroughly. Won't you join our staff meeting? A man's voice follows, equally pleasant yet hollow. We have a position available. Your qualifications are perfect. My back presses against the far wall as I notice something I missed before. A small door, perhaps a coal chute from the building's earlier days. I drag a heavy filing cabinet away from the wall, revealing the rusted access panel. It might be my only chance. As I work the ancient latch, I hear soft laughter through the door. She's discovering the passage, just like Catherine did. My blood freezes. I hesitate, then pull a dusty ledger from a nearby box. An architectural survey dated 1915, commissioned after the unfortunate incidents at St. Mary's. The basement schematic shows the coal chute leading not outside, but to a small antechamber beneath the east wing. The notes indicate the space was originally intended as a morgue cooling room but was sealed during construction due to persistent temperature anomalies and staff objections. The room where Eliza Westmore's personal effects were discovered during excavation. The door splinters at its hinges. Through the widening crack, I glimpse the starched white edge of a nurse's uniform. Desperate, I wrench open the passage door and squeeze through, pulling it shut behind me. The narrow tunnel slopes downward, brick-lined and thick with cobwebs. I crawl forward using my phone's flashlight, trying to control my panicked breathing. The passage ends at another small door. With no other options, I push through into darkness. My phone illuminates a circular chamber no more than 10 feet across. The walls, unlike the rest of the basement, are not concrete but rough stone, suggesting this space predates the hospital itself, perhaps part of the original Westmore House foundation. The beam of light reveals a table in the center. Atop it sits an open logbook and 13 small, identical medicine bottles arranged in a perfect circle. The book is filled with handwritten medical notations, procedures, and patient observations, a student nurse's practice journal. The final page contains just one sentence, repeated over and over in increasingly frantic handwriting. I will complete my training. I will complete my training. I will complete my training. Behind me, the door to the passage swings open. I don't turn around, but I feel them enter. The 6th nurse and the 3rd doctor. You've found my classroom, she says softly. How dedicated you are to historical accuracy. The final lesson is tonight, he adds. We've waited very patiently for our 13th student. I'm not, I begin, but stop as my phone light catches something on the far wall. 13 photographs arranged in a row. The first 12 show faces I don't recognize, expressions frozen in terror. The 13th frame holds a mirror. Everyone leaves something behind. The nurse whispers, now directly behind me. Catherine left her letter. Administrator Thornfield left his warning. What will your contribution be to St. Mary's history? I feel cold fingers on my shoulder as my phone light flickers and dies. The smell hits me first, antiseptic and something else, something earthen and wrong. As my eyes adjust to the darkness, shapes emerge in the faint light filtering through cracks in the stone wall. The nurse's cold fingers remain on my shoulder, her touch impossibly light, yet immovable. Your historical society has been negligent, she whispers, preserving only what others wish to remember, the sanitized version. My throat constricts as I attempt to speak. What happened to Catherine Wilson? The doctor moves to the table, lifting one of the small medicine bottles and examining it in the dim light. She lacked commitment to her education, tried to expose our methods. Catherine recognized my potential, the nurse continues, but she feared what she couldn't understand. True healing requires sacrifice. Something skitters across the floor. A rat, perhaps, or something worse. I press my back against the wall, desperate to maintain distance from these entities. The hospital administrators covered everything up, I manage. After the 13 deaths, the nurse laughs, a sound like cracking ice. 13 deaths? How limited your research has been. The doctor nods, placing the bottle precisely back in its circular arrangement. Administrator Thornfield understood eventually. After his wife fell ill with symptoms the other doctors couldn't diagnose. A terrible realization dawns. He made a deal with you. An exchange, the nurse corrects. His beloved survived. 13 others fulfilled my training requirements. The photograph was our contract, physical proof of our agreement. He tried to negate it with his little warning note, but agreements with us cannot be so easily broken. My mind races through historical records I've studied. The hospital's reputation recovered. It operated for decades afterward, with remarkable success rates, the doctor adds, particularly in cases other institutions deemed hopeless. The nurse releases my shoulder and moves to the mirror in the 13th frame. Every 13 years we require renewal. New students, new lessons. With growing horror, I recall the abandoned redevelopment projects. The contractors who found the photograph last year became our newest pupils, she confirms. We've been conducting interviews for our final position. My eyes dart to the passage door. Still open, still possible to flee. The doctor notices my glance. You misunderstand. We didn't bring you here to join us. You're far too valuable as our historian. The nurse nods. Someone must document our work properly. The hospital reopens next month. Surely you've heard? St. Mary's Memorial, restored to its former glory. A memory surfaces, the mayor's announcement about historic preservation and medical heritage. The ceremonial groundbreaking had been scheduled for tomorrow. We need someone to ensure our methods are remembered correctly this time, she continues, to maintain the balance. 13 students, 13 teachers, 13 weeks of instruction. The doctor opens the logbook. You'll begin by correcting the historical record, the true number of our patients, the actual procedure of their treatments. And if I refuse? My voice barely audible. The nurse's smile stretches unnaturally wide. Then we'll need a 13th student after all. But I think you'll find our offer professionally irresistible. She reaches toward the mirror, her fingers passing through its surface like water. History remembers those who write it, doesn't it? How many researchers dream of primary sources like us? The sound of my own breathing seems impossibly loud in this underground chamber. I've spent my entire academic career pursuing forgotten medical histories, and now the ultimate primary source stands before me. Two figures who should be long dead, offering me their secrets. The historian in me yearns to accept, even as the rational part of my mind screams warnings. You've been tampering with the photograph all along, haven't you? I ask, playing for time, moving it through the historical record, ensuring it surfaces at 13-year intervals. The nurse tilts her head, pleased with my deduction. Clever. Each time the image appears, it serves as both beacon and binding. Those who look too closely become part of our institution. I realize now why Alice Thornfield reacted so viscerally. Her grandmother must have warned her about the photograph's power, its ability to summon these entities when observed with careful attention. The hospital records, I murmur. All those unusual recoveries over the decades. Patients survived because others took their place. Equivalent exchange. The doctor nods. Medicine is merely mathematics at its core. Balance must be maintained. My fingers brush against something in my pocket, the folded corner of Catherine Wilson's letter that had broken off earlier. An idea forms, desperate and likely futile, but my only chance. Before I agree to anything, I say, trying to keep my voice steady, I need to understand your methods completely. Show me your training regimen. If I'm to document it properly, I should witness a demonstration. The nurse's eyes narrow slightly, but the doctor seems pleased by my apparent academic interest. He gestures toward the logbook. Begin here. The key principles are outlined on the first 13 pages. We've refined our approaches since Eliza's time, incorporating modern techniques. As he speaks, I inch toward the table, heart pounding. The arrangement of medicine bottles catches my attention. They form a perfect circle, like a clock face, but with 13 positions. The nurse moves to a shadowed alcove I hadn't noticed before, retrieving a white uniform folded with ceremonial precision. You'll need to understand our history from the beginning. Eliza Westmore was denied her rightful place in the medical community due to petty prejudices about temperament. They called her unstable, the doctor adds with disdain, simply because she believed in exploring all avenues of treatment, regardless of conventional limitations. While they're distracted by their narrative, I quickly scan the first pages of the logbook. The methodical handwriting details a horrifying procedure involving 13 extractions from each patient. Not just taking life, but something more fundamental, captured in these bottles. What strikes me most is the pattern of 13 X's marked beneath each completed procedure. 13 X's, 13 bottles, 13 patients. They need complete sets. The unfinished 12th photo with no accompanying bottle suddenly makes sense. The ground beneath the hospital begins to tremble. Above us, the sounds of construction equipment rumble. The preliminary work for tomorrow's ceremonial groundbreaking. They're disturbing the foundations, the nurse hisses, genuine alarm crossing her face. Too early. The 13th position isn't filled. For the first time, I sense vulnerability. Their careful arrangement, their precise counting. It's not just ritual, but necessity. Without the complete 13, something in their design weakens. Hope, however faint, flickers to life. The construction sounds intensify, and the doctor's composure falters momentarily. Dust sifts down from the ceiling as the vibrations increase. In that moment of distraction, I make my decision. The pattern is incomplete, I say, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. Your 13th position. It's still empty. The nurse's eyes sharpen. We have candidates, but no confirmation. I counter. The ceremony is tomorrow. You're running out of time. I step toward the table deliberately, eyes fixed on the arrangement. 13 extractions from 13 victims, preserved in 13 vessels, arranged in 13 positions. But your circle is incomplete. The trembling intensifies. A crack appears in the stone wall, and the nurse glances at it with undisguised concern. The hospital's foundation sits on unstable ground, I continue, daring to press my advantage. Not just physically. Your ritual requires perfect symmetry, perfect balance, just as Catherine Wilson realized. The doctor's hand moves toward me, but stops as another rumble shakes the chamber more violently. What did Catherine do? I ask. What did she understand that frightened you enough to make her disappear? She interfered with the arrangement, the nurse says softly, her voice suddenly tinged with something almost like fear. broke the circle when we were nearly complete. Understanding dawns. She didn't disappear. She sacrificed herself to disrupt your pattern. I reach for the table, not for the logbook, but for the 12th bottle. The entities react instantly, moving with unnatural speed, but the construction equipment above chooses that moment to drill directly overhead. The impact throws them off balance for just a heartbeat. It's enough. My fingers close around the small glass container. Cold radiates through my hand, a bone-deep chill that makes me gasp. "Return that immediately," the doctor commands, his pleasant facade completely gone now. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." "I understand enough," I reply, backing toward the passage door. 13 bottles, 13 photographs, 13 years. Break one link, and the chain fails. The nurse's face contorts with rage. "We've maintained this cycle for over a century. Do you think you're the first to attempt interference? The bottle contains—" I don't let her finish. With all my strength, I hurl the bottle against the stone wall. The glass shatters with a sound that seems impossibly loud, releasing not liquid, but a swirling, luminescent mist that hangs suspended in the air for a moment before dissipating. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. The remaining bottles begin to vibrate on the table, their contents glowing with the same eerie light. The photographs on the wall tremble in their frames, images blurring and shifting as if the subjects are suddenly moving. "What have you done?" The nurse screams, her form flickering like a faulty projection. The doctor lunges toward me but stumbles as his legs seem to lose substance. The ceiling gives way in a shower of dirt and stone. Construction lights from above pour into the chamber, illuminating everything in harsh, revealing brightness. 13 lessons, I whisper. Lesson 1, patterns can be broken. The harsh construction lights reveal what the darkness had mercifully concealed. The walls of the chamber aren't merely stone. They're embedded with remnants of human existence, fragments of uniforms, tarnished medical instruments, and personal belongings press out from the mortar, like fossils in sedimentary rock. This place wasn't built beneath the hospital. The hospital was built upon it, sealing away evidence of something much older. The remaining 12 bottles vibrate with increasing intensity, their contents swirling more frantically. The nurse and doctor flicker like damaged film, their forms alternating between the crisp medical professionals I first saw and something else, something withered and charred, with desperate, hollow eyes. "We preserved them," the nurse rasps, her voice fluctuating between professional calm and agonized whispers. "Before the fire, before they could reject me again. Each essence carefully extracted, studied, maintained." The doctor's uniform burns away as he reaches toward me, revealing blackened skin beneath. "The pattern must be completed," he insists. "The 13 positions filled. Your interference has unbalanced everything we've built." Above us, confused construction workers peer down through the collapsed ceiling. "Hey, there's someone down there," one shouts, his voice distant against the supernatural chaos unfolding around me. The photographs begin to change, the terrified faces shifting into something else. Relief. The mirror in the 13th frame cracks from edge to edge, and through the splintered glass, I see not my reflection, but Catherine Wilson's face, mouthing words I can't hear. A section of wall crumbles, revealing another hidden space beyond. Inside stands a hospital bed, ancient and rust-stained. Atop it lies a body, desiccated but perfectly preserved, wearing the tattered remains of a nurse's uniform. Her hands are folded precisely over a leather-bound volume I recognize immediately as the original logbook. "Eliza," I whisper, understanding at last. The nurse screams, a sound of both rage and desperation. "I earned my place. I completed every lesson they denied me." Her form lunges toward Eliza's preserved body, but the circle of bottles explodes simultaneously, releasing 12 more swirling essences. They coalesce between the nurse and her original form, creating a barrier she cannot penetrate. The doctor collapses to his knees, his shape dissolving at the edges. "The pattern," he gasps, reaching toward the shattered remains of the 12th bottle. "Without 13 complete circuits, we cannot maintain." Construction workers are lowering a ladder now, calling out questions I can't focus enough to answer. My attention remains fixed on the 13 essences now swirling together above Eliza's remains, forming a luminescent spiral that pulses with increasing brightness. The nurse makes one final, desperate lunge toward me. "You must complete the record," she insists, her fingers grasping at my wrist. Where she touches me, my skin burns with freezing cold. Someone must remember. Someone must continue. The lessons cannot be lost. Her touch leaves marks like frostbite, branching patterns that begin spreading up my arm. The numbness follows immediately, a cold that reaches toward my heart with alarming speed. The swirling essences above Eliza's remains create a vortex of memories that flood my consciousness. Not just images, but sensations, emotions, final moments. 12 people captured and preserved, their life forces extracted through a perversion of medical science Eliza had developed after her rejections. I understand now why Administrator Thornfield wrote his desperate warning on the back of the photograph. The spreading frost patterns on my arm reach my elbow, the numbing cold threatening to consume me entirely. With my free hand, I reach for Catherine's letter fragment still in my pocket. As I touch the yellowed paper, warmth spreads from it, a counterbalance to the nurse's deathly grip. "You collected them to prove your worth," I tell the nurse, whose form continues to flicker between professional appearance and charred reality. But they were never meant to be contained. The construction workers are shouting for me to grab the ladder, but I can't move yet. The spreading cold has paralyzed half my body. I hold up Catherine's letter fragment, and the nurse recoils slightly. "Catherine didn't try to expose you," I realize aloud. "She tried to release them. She understood what no one else did, that you were trapped in your own pattern as much as they were." The doctor's form has almost completely disappeared, his voice a fading echo. "The hospital thrived because of our work, because of the sacrifices." "Not sacrifices," I counter, the truth becoming clearer as the essences swirl faster. "Prisoners, including you both. 13 isn't just your ritual number, it's your sentence. 13 years between each cycle, 13 victims, 13 bottles. You've been repeating this pattern since 1914, unable to move on." Above us, one of the construction workers shouts something about structural instability. The entire chamber shudders ominously. With tremendous effort, I press Catherine's letter fragment against the nurse's freezing hand. The paper ignites with impossible blue flame, and she screams, not in pain, but in recognition. "Catherine," she whispers, her expression transforming from rage to something like sorrowful understanding. The frost patterns on my arm recede slightly as her grip weakens. The swirling essences descend toward Eliza's preserved body, surrounding it in luminous mist. "The photograph was never the contract," I tell her. "It was the evidence, the warning. The hospital wasn't built on your ground. You were buried beneath its foundation to contain you." Eliza's desiccated remains begin to crumble as the essences penetrate her preserved form. The nurse's figure becomes increasingly transparent, her voice fading. 13 lessons," she whispers. "The final lesson is release." With a sound like a long-held breath finally exhaled, the nurse's grip vanishes completely. The cold recedes from my body as her form dissolves into mist that joins the swirling essences. For a moment, they form a perfect circle of 13 distinct lights, 12 victims and Eliza herself, before rising toward the opening above. As they pass through, the entire chamber begins to collapse. I lunge for the ladder at last, climbing desperately as the walls disintegrate behind me. The workers pull me to safety, just as St. Mary's Foundation gives way entirely, burying the hidden chamber and all its secrets in rubble and earth. But not all secrets remain buried. In my pocket, I still carry the photograph, unchanged, except for one detail. The 6th nurse and 3rd doctor are gone, their spaces in the arrangement now conspicuously empty. The revelation that lies beneath St. Mary's continues to haunt me weeks after the collapse. The city has cordoned off the area indefinitely, citing historical preservation concerns, rather than acknowledging the inexplicable sinkhole that swallowed the construction equipment. I've been placed on administrative leave from the Historical Society, a polite way of removing the wild-eyed curator who keeps insisting on supernatural explanations for what officials have deemed a simple structural failure. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. The frost patterns on my arm have faded to faint silvery traces that resemble branching veins, visible only in certain light. Doctors have diagnosed it as superficial nerve damage from environmental exposure. They've recommended specialists, but what medical science could possibly understand about a nurse's touch from beyond the grave? Yesterday, I finally gathered the courage to visit the public cemetery, where records indicate Catherine Wilson was buried. Her grave is small and unassuming, the weathered headstone bearing only her name, dates, and the simple epitaph, "She brought light." Kneeling beside it, I placed the surviving fragment of her letter beneath a small stone. "You knew," I whispered to her memory. "You understood the pattern but couldn't break it completely. Only disrupt it." As twilight descended over the cemetery, I noticed something peculiar about the surrounding plots. Counting outward from Catherine's grave, 13 headstones formed a perfect circle around her. The dates revealed a pattern I should have recognized immediately. One death every 13 years, beginning in 1927, 13 years after the original incidents. The most recent grave dates from just last year, when the photograph was discovered during renovations. The groundskeeper who found me there confirmed my growing suspicion. "Strange about that one," he said, pointing to the newest headstone. "Construction worker. Accident at the old hospital site. Fire department said he just collapsed without warning. Heart stopped mid-shift. 12 others got sick around the same time, though they recovered. 12 survived. 1 died. The pattern attempting to reassert itself, even after I'd shattered the ritual. This morning's mail brought an envelope from Alice Thornfield, no note included, just a yellowed newspaper clipping dated November 13th, 1914. The headline reads, "Hospital Administrator commends staff for dedication during difficult season." The article briefly mentions Administrator Thornfield's gratitude toward his 12 loyal staff members for maintaining exemplary patient care despite recent turnover. 12 staff members, not 13, not 14. In the photograph now, 2 spaces remain empty, visible absences where the nurse and doctor once stood, but the others remain, their expressions somehow more relaxed than before, as if a tension has been released. I've locked the photograph in my home safe, unsure what to do with it. Some nights I wake convinced I hear counting from behind that steel door, not threatening, but like a ceremony of remembrance. 13 counts, then silence until the next night. Perhaps some patterns once established can never be fully broken, only transformed into something less malevolent, a remembrance rather than a binding, a warning rather than a sentence. The 13th lesson, as she said, was release. The morning after my cemetery visit, I received a call from the city planning office requesting all materials related to St. Mary's for their updated historical assessment. Their timing struck me as suspiciously convenient. When I arrived at my office to collect my research, I found the Historical Society director waiting with 2 unfamiliar men in suits. "These gentlemen are from the State Historical Preservation Committee," she explained, her smile too rigid. "They need to review our St. Mary's archives immediately." One man stepped forward, extending credentials I couldn't quite focus on. "Standard procedure following structural anomalies at historical sites," he stated flatly. I recognized containment when I saw it. "Of course," I replied, though most materials were lost in the incident. The second man's eyes narrowed. "We understand you removed certain artifacts prior to the collapse." Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang, Alice Thornfield's name on the screen. I excused myself to answer. "Don't give them anything," she whispered urgently. "They came to see me too. Asked about my grandmother's journals. They're not preservation officers." Looking back at the men, I noticed something I'd missed. Matching silver pins on their lapels formed in the shape of a medical caduceus with 13 stars surrounding it. "St. Mary's Medical Board still exists," Alice continued. "They've maintained operations in secret since 1941, overseeing certain specialized treatments at 13 affiliated facilities. My grandfather's legacy, preserved through different means." I ended the call, mind racing. "Gentlemen, I'll need proper documentation before releasing any materials," I stalled. "Historical Society protocols." The first man smiled thinly. "We understand you've experienced some confusion since the incident. Stress can create very convincing false memories, particularly about photographs with changing contents." The second added, "They knew. Something in their confident demeanor suggested they'd handled similar situations before." The director excused herself, leaving me alone with them. The first man removed a small case from his pocket. "We've developed effective treatments for exposure to St. Mary's unique historical radiation. Just a simple injection to clear your neural pathways of contamination." Inside the case nestled 13 identical syringes, each containing pale blue liquid, reminiscent of the swirling essences I'd witnessed. The pattern didn't end with Eliza, I realized aloud. Someone continued her work, refined it, corrected the second man. Administrator Thornfield understood the potential applications once properly controlled. The 13th extraction was never meant for punishment, but transformation. My eyes darted toward the exit, but the first man moved smoothly to block it. "You've become part of the pattern now. The mark on your arm proves it. You can either join our research division voluntarily or become our newest case study. Through the window, I glimpsed a white van in the parking lot with an innocuous medical supply company logo. Beneath it, barely visible, 13 small stars formed a perfect circle. The frost patterns on my arm tingled as if responding to their presence. I suddenly understood why Catherine had left her letter hidden, why Thornfield had written his warning. Some patterns, once encountered, never release you completely. The frost patterns on my arm pulsed as the men stepped closer with their case of syringes, a reaction I couldn't control. Through the window, I spotted movement, a figure in white near the van, watching our confrontation with unsettling stillness. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw Catherine Wilson's face, though logically I knew this was impossible. "You don't understand what you're collecting," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "These aren't just essences, they're people. Consciousness trapped in your extraction process." The first man sighed as though I'd disappointed him. Such a primitive interpretation. We're preserving what would otherwise be lost. The pattern provides structure. 13 vessels, 13 years, 13 facilities. Perfect symmetry yields perfect results. Medical breakthroughs require sacrifice, added the second. St. Mary's Research Division has developed treatments conventional medicine can't begin to approach. Terminal patients walk away cured, incurable diseases contained. At what cost? I challenged, noticing how the frost patterns spread slightly up my arm as my pulse quickened. 13 lives for every miracle. The first man selected a syringe from the case. Rather dramatic framing. "We prefer energy transfer. After your injection, you'll understand the elegance of our methods." My mind raced through possible escapes. The door behind me led to the archives, a windowless room with no secondary exit. The frost patterns now extended past my elbow, silver lines tracing paths like frozen rivers toward my heart. Then I felt it, a subtle vibration from my pocket where the photograph rested. Not threatening, but almost protective. The paper seemed to pulse with warmth against my chest, countering the spreading cold in my arm. The pattern works both ways, I realized aloud. If 13 essences can be contained, they can also be channeled. The men exchanged quick, concerned glances. "The photograph," the second one said sharply. "He still has it." The first lunged toward me, syringe extended. Without thinking, I pulled the photograph from my pocket. Where the sixth nurse and third doctor had once stood, the empty spaces now radiated a faint luminescence, visible even in daylight. As my fingers touched these vacant spots, the frost patterns on my arm flared brilliantly silver. The temperature in the room plummeted instantly. Breath fogged before our faces as the men staggered back, frost forming on their skin where the cold air touched them. Through the window, the white van's doors swung open on their own. The figure I'd glimpsed earlier multiplied. Now 13 identical silhouettes in white stood surrounding the vehicle, their faces indistinct yet somehow familiar. "Impossible," whispered the first man, his composure finally broken. The pattern was contained, the circle broken. "Not broken," I corrected, understanding flowing through me with sudden clarity. "Transformed. Eliza wanted to heal, not harm. You corrupted her purpose." The photograph in my hand grew warm as the frost patterns on my arm began to fade, the silvery lines absorbing back into the paper. In their place appeared 13 small stars, circling my wrist like a bracelet of faint scars. A different kind of pattern, a different kind of binding. "They're coming for their essence," I said, nodding toward the window. "And I don't think they're interested in your treatments." The 13 silhouettes surrounding the van moved with synchronized precision, their footsteps making no sound against the pavement. Frost formed on the office windows, intricate patterns that matched the fading marks on my arm. "The extraction process works in reverse," I explained, understanding flowing through me with each pulse of the photograph in my hand. "You took their essence, but you never destroyed their will." The first man lunged for the case of syringes as they began to vibrate, their blue contents swirling violently. "Containment protocol," he barked at his colleague, who was already backing toward the door. "Call the main facility. Tell them breach in progress, pattern destabilization." Outside, the 13 figures reached the building entrance. The security door, which required keycard access, swung open untouched. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. "They were never supposed to be conscious," the second man whispered, his composure completely shattered. "The extraction removes memory, removes identity. Thornfield's modifications ensured. Thornfield modified nothing." I interrupted, certainty flowing through me. He recognized what Eliza had created and tried to contain it. The photograph wasn't documentation. It was a warning label, a quarantine sign. The frost patterns spread from the windows to the walls, creeping across the ceiling in elaborate fractals. The overhead lights flickered and died, plunging the room into a dim blue glow emanating solely from the case of syringes and the photograph in my hand. "You can't possibly understand what you're interfering with," the first man insisted, desperation edging his voice. 13 facilities, 13 controlled environments. If you break the pattern here, you'll destabilize treatments currently sustaining hundreds of patients. The ethical weight of his statement hit me. If what he said was true, people would die. But the 13 silhouettes now entering the building's lobby suggested these treatments carried their own horrific cost. "There's another way," I said, addressing not the men but the patterns of frost surrounding us. Containment without consumption, healing without harvest. The circle of stars on my wrist began to warm, counterbalancing the cold permeating the room. I understood now. I had become a conduit, neither fully part of their pattern nor separate from it. The first footsteps became audible in the hallway outside my office. Deliberate and perfectly synchronized, 13 pairs of feet moving as one. The men backed against the far wall, eyes wide with recognition. "You've seen them before," I realized. "This has happened at the other facilities." "Twice," whispered the second man. 1976 and 2002. I resolved the incidents. "Contained them again," I translated. "Restarted the cycle." The door handle turned slowly, frost spreading from it like flowering crystals. The photograph in my hands began to change again. The empty spaces where the nurse and doctor had stood now filled with swirling light. I had a choice to make. The patterns could be broken completely, or they could be transformed into something new. Something that might preserve life without consuming it. The door swung open. The 13 figures entering the room were neither fully corporeal nor completely transparent, but something in between, like photographs developing in real time. Their forms flickered between modern clothing and antique hospital garb, their faces shifting between clarity and blur. Leading them was a presence I immediately recognized from the photograph, Catherine Wilson, her expression neither vengeful nor benevolent, but purposeful. The men from the preservation committee backed against the wall as frost crept up their legs, immobilizing them. The case of syringes vibrated with increasing intensity until the glass containers shattered, releasing 13 streams of luminescent blue essence that hovered in the air like suspended water. Catherine approached me, her eyes fixed on the photograph in my hands and the circle of stars now glowing on my wrist. "They corrupted the pattern," I told her, somehow knowing she could hear me. "They turned Eliza's work into something terrible." She nodded almost imperceptibly, then turned toward the floating essences. With a gesture reminiscent of a conductor beginning an orchestral piece, she guided the 13 streams into a circular formation that mirrored the starry pattern on my wrist. The first man struggled against his icy bindings. "You don't understand what you're dismantling. The medical advancements, the lives saved, at the cost of others," I countered. "There's a different pattern possible, one that doesn't require unwilling sacrifice." Catherine's form solidified slightly as she placed her hand over mine, our fingers both touching the photograph. A sudden rush of understanding flowed between us. Images of Eliza's original intentions, corrupted after her death. She hadn't sought to extract life essence as punishment, but to channel healing energy through willing conduits. The 13-star pattern wasn't meant for containment, but for amplification. 13 points of conscious connection, freely given. "The pattern can be rewritten," Catherine's voice whispered, though her lips didn't move. The circle of floating essences began to pulse in harmony with the stars on my wrist. The frost retreated from the walls, condensing instead into 13 crystalline vessels that formed in the air before us, each capturing a stream of essence. Not extraction, I understood aloud. Donation, not imprisonment, but partnership. The second man's eyes widened with reluctant comprehension. Symbiotic treatment protocols. We theorized it decades ago, but Thornfield's successors deemed it inefficient. "Because you can't control willing participants the way you can prisoners," I said. The 13 figures surrounding us began to change, their forms solidifying as they each approached one of the crystal vessels. As they touched the containers, their expressions transformed from blank purposefulness to something like peace. The photograph in my hand completed its transformation, no longer showing staff members posed in rows, but 13 individuals standing in a circle, hands joined, with Eliza Westmore at the center. The image radiated warmth instead of cold dread. Catherine's presence began to fade as she joined the circle in the photograph. Before disappearing completely, her voice echoed in my mind. 13 facilities, 13 vessels, 13 guardians. The pattern continues, but the purpose changes. You are the historian now, the keeper of both versions of the truth. The temperature in my home has never quite returned to normal. In the month since my encounter with Catherine and the 13 essences, frost forms on my windows on even the warmest summer mornings, delicate patterns that match the star circle permanently etched around my wrist. The photograph remains in my safe, though sometimes I find it on my desk when I wake, as if it migrated there while I slept. Last week I received an unmarked envelope containing 13 identical business cards. Each bears only a location, hospitals scattered across the country, and a date precisely 13 months from now. The cardstock feels unusual against my fingers, vibrating faintly like the photograph does when I hold it too long. Alice Thornfield called yesterday with troubling news. Her retirement community received a new resident, a painfully thin man with silver hair and empty eyes who watches her apartment from the garden. When she confronted him, he simply smiled and showed her a silver pin on his lapel, a medical caduceus with 13 stars. They haven't given up, she warned. The St. Mary's Medical Board still operates. They've just gone deeper underground. I've begun researching the 13 facilities marked on the business cards. Each hospital has an unusually high success rate with terminal cases, yet each also reports a single unexplained death annually. Always a patient without family, always at 3 in the morning, always with unusual lividity around the throat, noted in their files. The Historical Society reinstated me after the 2 men from the Preservation Committee mysteriously disappeared. Their white van was found abandoned at the hospital construction site, frost coating the interior despite the summer heat. My colleagues treat me with cautious distance now, eyes darting to the circle of stars on my wrist when they think I won't notice. Dreams of Catherine have returned, but transformed. No longer threatening, she shows me fragments of Eliza's original research, healing techniques that channel energy without extraction, treatments that amplify rather than consume. I've begun documenting these methods, translating early 20th century medical concepts into modern terminology. The work feels significant, like completing unfinished business a century in the making. Yesterday, I visited the abandoned construction site where St. Mary's once stood. The city has designated it a memorial park after multiple failed attempts to develop the land. Standing at the exact spot where the hidden chamber collapsed, I felt 13 distinct presences surrounding me, not threatening, but watchful. A young medical student approached as I was leaving, introducing herself as a distant relative of one of St. Mary's original nurses. Without prompting, she showed me her wrist, a birthmark in the shape of a perfect star. "There are 12 others like me," she said quietly. "We've been having the same dream, about a circle of light and a pattern that needs correction, about 13 hospitals where something is still extracting." The frost patterns on my arm tingled in recognition. The photograph in my pocket warmed. The pattern continues, but the purpose changes. The historian becomes the teacher. 13 students await. The circle of 13 stars on my wrist pulses as I stand before the first of the 13 facilities. Mercy General in Portland. The medical student with the star birthmark, Emma Thornfield, waits in the car, nervously watching the hospital's entrance. We've spent months preparing for this journey, gathering the others like her. 12 individuals with star birthmarks who each represent a connection to Eliza's original vision. In my hand, the photograph has changed yet again. The 13 figures now appear to be in motion, their circle protecting something luminescent at its center. The image shifts subtly depending on which hospital we approach, as if calibrating itself to each location's unique energy signature. Last night I discovered something critical in Administrator Thornfield's personal journal, pages Emma found hidden in her great-grandmother's belongings. The 13th extraction was never meant to be fatal. Eliza's original design required 13 willing participants to form a circuit of healing energy. The corruption began when Thornfield, desperate to save his wife, allowed the substitution of an unwilling victim. "The willing circle becomes unwilling chain," he wrote in trembling handwriting. 13 links that bind rather than unite. 13 prisons rather than channels. God forgive me, I've perverted her beautiful vision into something monstrous. Emma approaches now, her star birthmark visibly pulsing beneath her skin. "They know we're here," she says quietly. "Security has been doubled at all entrances. The board maintains complete control over the 13th floor. The 13th floor. The pattern reveals itself in every detail. Each of the 13 hospitals maintains a restricted ward there, accessible only to board-approved personnel. According to employee records we've obtained, each facility employs exactly 13 specialized nurses who rotate through this ward on 13-week cycles. I touch the frost patterns on the window of a nearby car, watching as they form a familiar branching pattern, a map of connections between the 13 facilities, with St. Mary's original location at the center. Not a simple circle as I'd first believed, but an elaborate web of energy transference. The board doesn't just extract essence, I explained to Emma. They redistribute it. 13 hospitals, 13 unwilling donors, 13 wealthy recipients. A perfect system of immortality for those who can afford it. My research has uncovered board members who haven't aged in decades, whose medical records show miraculous recoveries from terminal conditions. Their photographs maintain an unnatural stillness reminiscent of the nurse and doctor who disappeared from our original image. Catherine's voice whispers from the photograph in my pocket. The 13th lesson remains incomplete. The pattern must be rewritten, not just disrupted. The stars on my wrist align with Emma's birthmark as she stands beside me. And for a moment, I see what Eliza originally envisioned. 13 willing channels forming a network of freely given healing energy, powerful enough to treat thousands without consuming anyone. We need to reach all 13 facilities simultaneously, I tell Emma. Break the extraction pattern and establish the donation circuit before the board realizes what we're doing. She nods, touching her star birthmark. The others are in position, waiting for your signal. The historian becomes the catalyst. 13 hospitals, 13 willing participants, 13 chances to transform extraction into exchange. The frost patterns spread from my hand to the hospital's entrance doors as I step forward. The frost patterns crystallize beneath my fingers as I touch the hospital's entrance, forming an intricate network that spreads across the glass like living circuitry. Each branch corresponds to one of the 13 facilities where, at this exact moment, the others are performing identical actions, creating a synchronized circuit that hasn't existed since Eliza's original design was corrupted. As the door swings open, alarms begin to wail, not the expected security alerts, but medical emergency signals emanating from the 13th floor. Emma and I exchange knowing glances. The board's extraction process is already destabilizing. They've been drawing from the same 13 souls for over a century, I explain as we hurry through the lobby. Hospital staff too preoccupied with the alarms to notice us. Catherine and the others were never fully released, only transformed into vessels the board could control. The elevator requires keycard access to the 13th floor, but the frost patterns from my wrist spread to the control panel, overriding electronic barriers with something more fundamental than technology. The display flickers, then shows a single button illuminated. 13. The board believes they own the pattern, Emma whispers as we ascend. They don't understand they're merely borrowing power that was never theirs to take. The 13th floor reveals itself as the elevator doors open. A sterile white corridor with 13 rooms arranged in a perfect circle around a central nursing station. Through glass observation windows, I can see 13 patients in identical beds, each connected to machines that pulse with familiar blue luminescence. At the nurse's station stands a tall, silver-haired man with the caduceus pin on his lapel, the same man who has been watching Alice Thornfield. His eyes widen with recognition, then narrow with contempt. "The historian," he says flatly. "You've brought another volunteer for our program. How thoughtful." The frost patterns on my arm flare painfully as the 13 monitoring systems begin to shriek in unison. On the screens above each patient, vital signs fluctuate wildly as something within them awakens. "Not a volunteer," I correct him. "A rightful heir. Emma Thornfield carries Eliza's bloodline and Catherine's purpose." The man lunges for an emergency button, but frost engulfs his hand before he can reach it. "You can't possibly understand what you're interfering with," he gasps. "The pattern sustains lives, important lives, at the cost of others," Emma replies, her birthmark glowing visibly now. "My great-grandmother's journals explained everything, how my family has carried this guilt for generations, watching the board twist Eliza's healing circuit into something monstrous." The photograph in my pocket burns with increasing warmth as the 13 patients begin to stir simultaneously, their monitoring equipment failing as frost spreads across electronic components. The silver-haired man's composure crumbles completely. "It took us decades to stabilize after your disruption. 13 perfect vessels, 13 willing participants. Do you know how difficult those were to find? His unintentional confession hangs in the air as understanding dawns. These patients weren't donors. They were the original 13 souls. Their essences repeatedly harvested and redistributed across the network of hospitals. The circuit was never broken. It was merely waiting to be completed correctly. Emma moves with sudden purpose toward the first patient, an elderly woman whose monitors display the most erratic readings. As she touches the woman's hand, their star markings align and glow with synchronized pulses. Recognition flickers in the woman's eyes. "Catherine," I whisper, understanding immediately. The silver-haired man struggles against his icy restraints. "You can't remove them from the circuit. The entire network will collapse. 13 board members will die." "They won't die," I correct him, knowledge flowing through me via the patterns on my arm. "They'll simply age naturally again, return to the normal human condition they've been evading for decades." Around us, frost spreads across the floor in 13 distinct pathways, connecting each patient bed to the center of the room where Emma now stands. The photograph in my pocket undergoes its final transformation. The image now shows Eliza at the center of her original healing circle. Her expression, one of determined compassion rather than vengeance. "The extraction was only half the pattern," Emma explains, her voice taking on Catherine's cadence. "Eliza designed a complete circuit, willing donation, amplification, and return. The energy was meant to flow continuously, healing thousands without depleting anyone." On the monitors, blue energy begins flowing in reverse, not from the patients to the extraction machinery, but from the machinery back into the patients. Vital signs strengthen as each individual receives what was stolen from them. From my pocket, I retrieve the 13 business cards that appeared months ago. Each now displays a name instead of just a location. The original 13 who formed Eliza's circle before Thornfield's corruption. I place them in sequence around Emma, completing our own circle. 13 hospitals, I intone, the historian becoming ritual master. 13 vessels, 13 guardians. The pattern continues, but the purpose changes. The silver-haired man slumps in defeat. "You don't understand what you've done. The board has contingencies, other patterns, other methods. But not this pattern," Emma replies. "Not these 13. They're returning home now." The patients begin to change before our eyes, their aged appearances giving way to their true forms as they were when first captured in the pattern. Catherine rises from her bed first, no longer elderly but the young nurse from the photograph. The others follow, each shaking off decades of enforced slumber. My phone buzzes with 12 simultaneous messages from our companions at the other facilities. Identical scenes playing out across the country, the pattern awakening all at once. "What happens now?" I ask Catherine as she approaches, her form becoming more solid with each step. "Now we correct the pattern," she answers. 13 willing participants, 13 facilities, 13 channels of freely given healing energy. The frost recedes from the walls as warmth fills the room, not the artificial preservation of stolen life, but the genuine warmth of something long frozen finally thawing. The pattern transforms from prison to pathway. The truth takes physical form as the 13 awakened patients gather in a circle with Emma and me at its center. The frost patterns on my wrist flow outward, connecting with each of them until we form a living circuit of shared consciousness. Through this connection, I witness the complete history of St. Mary's, not just fragments, but the unbroken truth Eliza intended to preserve. In the summer of 1907, Eliza Westmore wasn't merely rejected from nursing programs. She discovered something fundamental about human energy that the medical establishment actively suppressed. Her research revealed that illness was often an energetic imbalance that could be corrected through directed consciousness. She gathered 13 individuals with natural healing abilities, forming the first circle at her family estate. The fire that supposedly claimed her life was actually set by members of an ancient medical society who had maintained control over healing practices for centuries. This society, which would later become the St. Mary's Medical Board, recognized the threat her discoveries posed to their power. But Eliza had anticipated their attack. The 13 participants in her circle voluntarily bound their energies to hers at the moment of the fire, creating a pattern that preserved their collective consciousness. They became 13 stars, 13 points of light that could continue their work from beyond physical form. When Administrator Thornfield built the hospital on that land, he unknowingly provided the perfect vessel for their continued work. The 13 began influencing patients and staff, facilitating remarkable recoveries that medical science couldn't explain. But Thornfield eventually sensed their presence and, rather than joining their mission, sought to control it. The photograph wasn't just documentation. It was a capture device. The camera, specially modified with technology from the Medical Society, trapped the 13 energetic beings in physical form, forcing them to manifest as hospital staff. Once visible, they could be contained and their healing energies harvested. What I had interpreted as 13 victims were actually 13 willing participants in Eliza's original circle. What I had seen as extraction was their desperate attempt to continue healing despite imprisonment. The unusually high mortality rate wasn't their doing. It was the result of the pattern being broken, healing energies suddenly withdrawn from patients who had come to depend on them. "We never wanted anyone to die," Catherine explains, her voice steady as the truth flows between us. "Each time we've awakened, we've tried to restore the original pattern. Each time, the board has recaptured us, twisted our purpose." The room temperature stabilizes as the 13 former patients complete their transition, each now emanating gentle light rather than frost. The silver-haired man watches in mingled horror and fascination. The pattern was never about death, I realize aloud. It was about transcendence. 13 willing participants creating something greater than themselves. Emma's birthmark pulses with newfound understanding. That's why my family has carried this mark for generations. Not as punishment, but as invitation. We were meant to help complete the circle when the time was right. The wall behind us dissolves, revealing not hospital infrastructure but a shimmering threshold, a passage to whatever space the 13 have occupied between manifestations. The true 13th floor, existing between worlds. Through the shimmering threshold, I glimpse a landscape that defies physical description. Not quite a place, but a state of conscious energy, where healing intentions take visible form. The 13 original participants extend their hands toward Emma and me, inviting us to step through. "This is where we've existed between manifestations," Catherine explains. "The space where Eliza's original vision continues undistorted. From here, we can channel healing without extraction, connection without consumption." I hesitate at the threshold, understanding the magnitude of this choice. The historian must now decide whether to remain observer or become participant. The frost patterns on my wrist pulse with anticipation. "What about the other 12 like me?" Emma asks. "The ones positioned at the other hospitals? They're experiencing this same threshold," Catherine answers. "All 13 facilities have become doorways simultaneously. The pattern requires willing choice. That's what the board never understood." The silver-haired man slumps against the wall, ice melting from his restraints as the pattern's transformation completes. "You have no idea what forces you're unleashing," he warns. "There are older societies than ours, older patterns than Eliza's. They'll sense this disturbance." His words carry genuine fear rather than manipulation, giving me pause. "What other patterns exist?" "Healing is just one form of energy manipulation," he murmurs. "There are those who work with other energies, darker ones. We've kept them in check through our control of the 13 points. Without our management, the 13 exchange knowing glances, silent communication flowing between them. Catherine turns back to us with newfound resolve. He speaks some truth. Our circle was meant not only to heal, but to maintain balance against other patterns. Eliza understood this. It's why her design was so precise. 13 points, 13 participants, 13 stars forming a protective constellation. The implications hit me fully. The pattern wasn't merely a healing circuit, but a shield against something else. By disrupting the board's corrupt version, we may have temporarily weakened this protection. "This is bigger than St. Mary's," I whisper. Emma steps confidently toward the threshold. "Then we need to restore the original pattern properly, not as prisoners or jailers, but as willing guardians." The hospital building trembles slightly, and through the windows I can see other structures in the city responding to the energy shift. Lights flickering, glass vibrating in resonance. The pattern's transformation affects not just these 13 facilities, but the energetic framework underlying reality itself. I make my decision, stepping through the threshold with Emma. The sensation defies description, like dissolving and becoming more solid simultaneously, my consciousness expanding beyond physical limitations while remaining anchored to purpose. From this vantage point, I can see all 13 hospitals connected by lines of light, forming a vast geometric pattern across the continent. But beyond this pattern lie darker configurations, ancient and predatory, stirring at the disturbance we've created. The truth of St. Mary's was just the surface of a much deeper reality, one where conscious energy forms the true architecture of existence, and where patterns are both protection and power. Our work has only just begun. As the 13 of us stand at the threshold between worlds, I realize what the photograph truly represented. Not just a warning or a binding, but a blueprint. The arrangement of figures in the image wasn't coincidental, but instructional, showing how the protective constellation should form. The photograph must remain in this world, Catherine explains, sensing my thoughts. It serves as both anchor and map for those who might need to find us. From our elevated perspective, I watch as the St. Mary's Medical Board headquarters across the country erupts in frantic activity. Their members, suddenly aging decades in minutes, desperately pull ancient texts from hidden vaults, seeking other patterns to exploit, other sources of stolen vitality. They'll try again, Emma observes. Different methods, different victims, but not with our pattern, I reply, understanding flowing through me. The photograph is changing one final time. In the world below, the image transforms in my abandoned pocket, no longer showing 13 individuals in a circle, but becoming a simple glass plate negative with no discernible image at all. To the casual observer, it appears completely blank, its secrets visible only to those marked by the pattern. The silver-haired man is being joined by others wearing the 13-star caduceus, board members from across the country converging as their carefully maintained network collapses. Their expressions shift from anger to fear as shadows begin gathering around their facilities, manifestations of the darker patterns their corrupted shield had kept at bay. We need to re-establish the protection quickly, Catherine urges. The board's methods were cruel, but their shield was functional. Emma and the 12 others with star birthmarks move into position, forming a circle that mirrors Eliza's original design. As they join hands, their birthmarks pulse with synchronized light, creating a new protective constellation, not powered by extraction and imprisonment, but by willing participation and shared purpose. The shadows recede, hissing with frustration at the barrier reforming against them. The board members watch in disbelief as their organizational power crumbles, while the protection they claim to maintain strengthens without them. The pattern continues, I whisper, but the story changes. The 13 original participants begin to fade, their century-long vigil finally complete. Before disappearing entirely, Catherine takes my hand, transferring something into my palm, a small crystalline star that absorbs into my skin, joining the circle around my wrist. The historian becomes the keeper, she says, her voice already distant. Some patterns must be remembered to never be repeated, as the original 13 depart for whatever rest awaits them after 100 years of watching. I understand my role in this new constellation, not as participant but as witness, ensuring the pattern's true history remains uncorrupted. The photograph will find its way to new hands when needed. The star markings will appear on those chosen to maintain the shield. The frost patterns will form warnings when darker energies approach, and I will document it all. The true archivist of a pattern that stretches back further than St. Mary's, further than Eliza Westmore, to something ancient and necessary. 13 points of light against encroaching shadow. Some frames cast shadows, others capture light. The pattern continues. The small crystalline star that absorbed into my skin has changed me fundamentally. Each night when I close my eyes, I witness fragments of memory that aren't mine. 13 lives stretching back centuries before St. Mary's was even conceived. I see Eliza's true origins, not as a rejected nursing student, but as the latest in a lineage of pattern keepers dating back to ancient medical traditions. My apartment walls are now covered with maps and timelines as I piece together the greater history. The 13 hospitals weren't randomly placed, but positioned along precise energetic ley lines, creating a geometric shield above major population centers. In my dreams, I witness older iterations of this pattern. 13 druidic healing circles in medieval Europe, 13 temple sites in ancient Mesopotamia, 13 cave paintings showing the same star configuration in prehistoric times. The responsibility weighs heavily. Emma and the other 12 guardians maintain the active shield, but they require historical context to understand what they're protecting against. The darker patterns have names and histories too. ancient consciousness that feeds on suffering rather than healing, entities that have been held at bay by successive generations of 13-point constellations. Alice Thornfield passed away last week, finally free from her family's burden of knowledge. In her will, she left me a sealed container dating back to 1914, Administrator Thornfield's original research notes, hidden from the board. The papers reveal his gradual understanding of what he'd encountered, his initial corruption of the pattern driven not by malice but by desperate love for his ailing wife. Most disturbing are his observations of what happened during the pattern's 13-day collapse when Catherine disappeared. Shadow manifestations in the hospital's East Wing, patients reporting nightmare visitations, staff experiencing time distortions. The same phenomena now occurring around former board facilities as Emma's new constellation stabilizes. Yesterday, I received a letter without postmark or return address. Inside was a single photograph, not the saint. Mary's staff portrait, but something much older. A daguerreotype dated 1847 showing 13 medical practitioners standing before a field hospital. Their arrangement matches our pattern precisely, and though the image is faded, I can distinguish a familiar face among them, Catherine Wilson, appearing exactly as she did in 1914. On the back, written in fresh ink, the pattern existed before us and will continue after us. History isn't linear, it's circular. The 13th return approaches. I've begun calculating the pattern's cyclical nature, converting 13 years, 13 months, 13 weeks into precise mathematical progressions. The results are troubling. According to my calculations, we're approaching another 13-point convergence where the shield naturally weakens before strengthening again. The board knew this timing well, planning their extractions to coincide with these vulnerable periods. The frost patterns form on my windows each morning, more intricate and urgent than before. They're no longer just echoes of what happened, but warnings of what comes next. Through them, I glimpse shadow movements gathering beyond Emma's protective constellation. Ancient intelligences testing the new barrier, seeking weaknesses. The 13th return isn't just Catherine and her circle. It's something older awakening, something that has been contained by succession of 13-point patterns throughout human history, something now sensing change in its prison walls. The stars on my wrist burn as I stand before the remains of St. Mary's. After 13 months guiding Emma and the others, I've returned to where everything began. The city's redevelopment plans transformed the hospital grounds into a memorial garden, though few understand what they're actually commemorating. The photograph that started everything sits in my hands, now appearing completely blank to anyone without the mark. But as the morning frost forms patterns across its surface, I can see all versions simultaneously. The original staff portrait, the circle of 13, the empty spaces where figures once stood, and something new emerging, a warning about what approaches. Last night, all 13 guardians reported identical dreams, a shadow presence testing their constellation from beyond, something that remembers Eliza and all who came before her, something patient. The crystalline star within me has revealed the greater truth. The 13-point pattern wasn't created to contain this entity, but created by it, a prison it designed for itself during moments of lucidity, knowing its darker nature needed containment. Each generation of 13 guardians are not just protectors, but caretakers of something ancient that both heals and harms. In the frost patterns forming across the garden, I see fragments of future events, 13 new star-bearers being born as the current ones age, the photograph finding its way to new hands when needed, the pattern continuing its endless cycle of imprisonment and awakening. Administrator Thornfield understood this eventually. His final journal entry, which Alice preserved separately from the others, reads, "The pattern must continue, but the knowledge must be controlled. Not everyone need bear this burden. Better to be thought monsters ourselves than reveal the true monster we contain." The medical board, for all its cruelty, was right about one thing. Without control, the pattern weakens. Emma's constellation of willing participants is stronger but lacks the desperate vigilance fear provides. They heal without extracting, protect without imprisoning, but their compassion leaves blind spots the shadow has already begun to exploit. I trace the 13 stars on my wrist, each representing a guardian now positioned around the country. Through our connection, I send what the crystalline star has revealed, not to frighten them, but to prepare them. The 13th return isn't just the awakening of Catherine's circle, or the resurgence of the board's power. It's the testing of the boundaries that have contained something far older. Frost forms on the blank photograph, revealing one final image I've never seen before. 13 medical practitioners standing before a field hospital in 1847, but now I can see what's behind them. A shadow with 13 points of light embedded within it, a conscious darkness that has been teaching humanity to contain it for millennia. I carefully wrap the photograph in archival paper and place it in the cornerstone of St. Mary's Memorial Garden, where it will remain until needed again. The frost patterns recede from its surface as it disappears into darkness, waiting to be rediscovered when the pattern requires a new historian. Some frames capture light, others contain darkness. Sometimes the frame itself is the prison. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.